Welcome to Texans on Tap. I'm Brandon Strange with Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan. Read their work on sportsmap.com and follow them on X at Palillo and at JoshJordan975. Click like and subscribe to support us. Click the bell for notifications so you know when new content drops, especially when we are live after every game this season on YouTube. And if you prefer listening to your podcast, we're on all your favorite podcast apps like Apple and Spotify. Gents, I have to be 100% transparent here. When we were making our season predictions, this was a game I felt fairly confident would be a W for Houston. But 2 games into this young 2024 season, I am very concerned about this matchup because this Viking team looks a lot more formidable than I originally anticipated. And they made a statement against the Shanahan offense, beating the 49ers last week. So far, Brian Flores' defense with those disguised coverages is the early headline for Minnesota. They did surrender 294 through the air, but held San Francisco to 102 yards on the ground and just 17 points overall. So for Houston in week 2, the Bears were effective at putting pressure on Stroud with just their front 4. How do you like CJ Stroud and the offense's chances against this stout Vikings defense?
Notably, no Christian McCaffrey for the 49ers against the Vikings, but still stout work for Minnesota. And running backs question for the Texans, Joe Mixon. I was wow when he re-entered the game after that gruesome-looking ankle roll against the Bears. But how does he bounce back through the week of recovery, and will he be 100% ready to go? Brian Flores is a very good defensive coordinator. Evidently, he was a jerk of a human being as a head coach, asked Tua Tagovailoa, but we're supposed to all learn from our mistakes in life. Some are meant to be colonels, not generals. Maybe this is what Flores is best suited for. But as always, a chef can only make so much of a meal given the ingredients with which he has to work. And Flores has some real good stuff to work with. The Texans' offensive line is going to be substantially challenged. Hey, Laramie Tunsil, remember the freaking snap count. Minnesota's very loud as a stadium, roof open or not. The Vikings have 11 sacks 2 games into this season, and they've been coming from multiple points. Really, a guy's a situational pass rusher, not an every down beast. Patrick Jones Jr., 2 sacks in each of their 2 wins. The de facto trade with Danielle Hunter coming to the Texans. Jonathan Gennard going the other way with just 1 sack. I mean, it's 2 games, so the sample size, the data is not all that important. But Gennard, as he was here opposite Will Anderson with the Vikings, is a guy who must be accounted for. The one question I have with Minnesota's defense a little bit is I wonder about the speed in their secondary. So if the Texans' offensive line gives Stroud time to drop back, we know Nico Collins is just phenomenal, and Tank Dell's the speed threat. Stephon Gilmore is a very good corner, signed with Minnesota late in the offseason, really over the summer after he found the market kind of dry for him because he's 34 years old, but he was good with the Cowboys. Evidently, he's off to a fine start with the Vikings. And Minnesota really needed a boost in that secondary because their 4th-round draft pick was a corner, tragically killed, victim of what seems to be a DUI. And then a guy they projected to be one of their 2 starting corners blew out an ACL one of the first days of training camp. So in that secondary, Harrison Smith's been a long time, real good safety, but he's a 12th-year guy, so I'm sure he doesn't run the way he did when he was a second-year guy. I mentioned Gilmore. Byron Murphy's another solid journeyman-type guy. But I think if given time to throw, this seems to be a decent matchup for the Texans to go after it with a downfield passing game.
Yeah, it's interesting. Flores is doing some different things this year. He's running more deep safeties, more cover 4. And Minnesota has lined up a league-high 79% in the 2-high safety rate. I don't know if you've seen all the comments about 2-high safeties. Mel Kiper Jr. has been saying that they need to outlaw it in football because it's changing the game. That's certainly not going to happen, but he's doing it because it's effective. The guy I'm going to be really looking at is Nico Collins here. Through some of these deep dives into these stats, no surprise, Stroud really locks in on Nico Collins when he's being blitzed. We know how much they like to blitz with Flores. So when I was watching that game against the 49ers, even when Kittle and Deebo Samuel were catching passes, they seemed to have a couple dudes draped all over him a lot of the time. So I wonder if when they really bring the blitz, if they're going to maybe double Nico, make CJ find somebody else to throw the football to, which would make a lot of sense. So when you're going versus 2 high, Tank Dell has actually been targeted about the same rate as Dalton Schultz. a little bit under Nico. So I wonder if this might be a Tank Dell game. But when we look back at Nico, 31% target per route run rate versus 2 high safeties. So if they take Nico away, they're going to have to find somewhere else to go with that football. So here's the numbers. The Vikes have used cover 4 on 33 and 35% of their plays in the 2 games this season. Like I said, it's about up 10% from last year. So I'm thinking maybe a Tank Dell game here. I know Diggs wasn't with the team last year, but Dell's a good guy. When you want to get the ball deep down the field a little bit, you can't go to Nico. And he hasn't done much. I did an article this week that Tank only has 1 less target than Diggs, but the numbers are way off. Diggs has way more catches. He's been a way bigger focus in this offense this year. So I think, Tank, he is the top target for CJ Stroud against cover 4 since the start of the 2023 season. So I'm thinking if they're going to get this offense going, you worry about the run game a little bit. We don't know with Joe Mixon. And that's the thing with the 49ers. They didn't have McCaffrey, but Jordan Mason rushed for over 5 yards a carry. He had 100 yards in the game. So they had a very effective run game and still lost. They were playing from behind a lot in this game too. That's something to keep in mind. But I think the Texans, they got to get something going on in the run game here, or CJ could have a long day.
If you're going to play cover 4, 2 deep safeties, that's designed to maybe be a little bit of bend, don't break. The 49ers did have nearly 400 yards of offense. Can the Texans finish off drives? I mean, Kaimi Fairbairn's been a perfect weapon so far in the kicking game. Is this a matchup where you can win it with 1 touchdown and 4 field goals? If that's what it takes. And again, taking care of the football, CJ Stroud still seems to be largely turnover proof, at least 2 games into the season after just 5 picks in the 15 games in which he played last season. But Minnesota was not mentioned as an NFC contender coming into the season. It's just 2 games in. Everyone's going to beat the Giants this year. Most people are going to beat the Giants, but the Vikings beat them like a freaking drum. But then when they beat the 49ers, and we'll get to the flip side, I get it, but the idea that, who's going to take any team quarterback by Sam Darnold seriously? Well, Minnesota's defense is going to be turnover causing and sack generating, and the offense doesn't beat itself, and you have one of the, half dozen best offensive weapons in the game. Detroit's nouveau riche, but I don't think the Lions are a superpower yet. The Packers with or now without Jordan Love, right? Is that a team that anyone's thinking is going to go 14-3? And the Bears have a nucleus together, but they're not going to arrive this season with Caleb Williams. So Minnesota can absolutely be a factor in the NFC North. And who knows? You get down tiebreaker situation and home field advantage. They already have that win over the 49ers tucked away. So this is a good, interesting challenge for the Texans. Is one of these 2 teams is going to be 3-0. We'll remove the possibility of a tie.
I'm sorry, Charlie. What jumped out to me was this game was a blowout, basically. If it wasn't for Fred Warner making some huge plays, Aaron Jones fumbling on the goal line, I mean, I went back and watched that game. The 49ers they were outcoached by the Vikings. It wasn't, it should have been a lot bigger blowout, like I said, than it was. And you look at Sam Darnold, we can say the journeyman, all that kind of stuff. But, remember he spent last year under Shanahan with the 49ers. He goes to a similar system with the Vikings. So he's very familiar with what the 49ers like to do. They're very familiar with each other, where does the Texans offense come from? Comes from the 49ers. So I think there's going to be a lot of cat and mouse games going on here between Slowick and Flores. But I will say this, I'm glad that the Texans caught him this week, where they can see all the tricks they used against that San Francisco offense on defense. So that'll be all on tape for Slowick and Stroud to see, like, okay, this is what they like to do against us. I'm sure Flores will have some wrinkles. He'll change some things up, but I'm glad that they're not going to go into this game thinking they can just roll over the Vikings. They're going to go into this game going, man, they kicked the crap out of the Niners last week. We better bring it.
And 2 more names on that Vikings defense, I think, worthy of note. Dallas Turner was their first-round draft choice. That they wanted a young speed guy to complement Grenard on the outside. He was the 3rd defensive player taken in the entire draft out of Alabama. And the Vikings' leading tackler through 2 games, Blake Cashman, been in on 19 tackles. Right, the Texans did not clearly upgrade with Cashman out and Azeez Al-Shire in. And Azeez Al-Shire behaved better. You're lucky you didn't get kicked out against the Bears. Obviously, you got a fine during the week for his kind of snapping on the field there. So, yeah, this is the best defense, I think, that the Texans will have seen 3 games in. The Bears pretty good, but the Vikings might be a notch better. And, of course, this game obviously is on the road.
Yeah, and Houston has averaged 3.5 sacks surrendered through the first 2 games. They need to protect Stroud. I mean, I know I'm Captain Obvious here, but they need to protect Stroud if they hope to take advantage of those other receivers besides Nico, to your point, Josh. Because if Tank's opportunities are going to be limited, he also needs to make catches when he does have the opportunity and not just be a weapon on gadget plays in the backfield. So Josh, you brought up Darnold, so let's go to Minnesota's offense because it has been surprisingly effective so far. J.J. McCarthy obviously went down before the season with the knee injury, so Darnold wins the battle by default. So far, so good. Against the Niners, Darnold threw for 268 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Not very efficient, though, 17 of 26 on passing attempts with an interception. But Justin Jefferson, man, 4 receptions for 133 yards and a touchdown. That's an average of over 33 yards per catch for those doing grade school math. And look, that included a 97-yard touchdown reception. Now, Houston has been able so far, at least they were able to prevent the big plays against the Bears. But the safety play continues to be a concern of D'Amico's scrappy defense. So how do you like their ability to contain Minnesota's passing attack?
Nico Collins is banging on the door to join the very tip-top tier of wide receivers in the NFL. Justin Jefferson might be the very top of that tier, with CeeDee Lamb, a couple of others. Jefferson's just freaking fantastic. And yes, 97-yard touchdown plays will pump up the old yards per catch. Did tweak a quad in the game against the 49ers, but he's certainly going to go Sunday. Their number 2 wide receiver is a little less certain in Jordan Addison. You want to roll coverage to Jefferson. Derek Stingley's not coming off his best of games, and I don't think he's just established at the level of, okay, take Justin Jefferson out of the game. You go everywhere he goes, one-on-one. The Texans are going to give help, I think, on Jefferson. What kind of respect do they have for other Vikings weapons in the passing game? But it's not a one-headed monster. Again, it's just the 2 games, but they have 2 different running backs averaging 5.5 yards per carry. Right? Aaron Jones was a nice pickup from Green Bay. Ty Chandler's the complement, a little more of a scoot guy who's been there 3-4 years, each of them at 5.5 yards per carry. Darnold has thrown 1 pick in each game. If you're the Texans, you're hoping revert to being Jets Sam Darnold or Carolina Sam Darnold. But you made the point. Now he's in a real NFL operation, at least on the offensive side of the ball. Kevin McConnell, a branch of the Sean McVay tree, after a year at the Kyle Shanahan finishing school of West Coast offense, 72% completion percentage. That's not going to be sustainable, or the Vikings are going to be in the NFC Championship game. So maybe Darnold just flattens out some, and the Texans, if they can force at least a 3rd consecutive game with Darnold throwing 1 interception, obviously that would be a boon to the cause.
Yeah, if we're looking at another option for them, Jaylen Naylor had a pretty good game for him last week, 54 yards and a touchdown. Like Charlie mentioned, we don't know if Addison's going to be able to go in this game, so they may go back to Naylor. One of the big takeaways I had watching their offense, the screen game was really giving the Niners fits. Aaron Jones had 5 catches for 36 yards, so they were able to kind of make that an extension of the run game because Jones didn't do a whole lot on the ground, 9 carries for 32 yards. But when you get him to catch 5 passes for 36 yards and you complement that with Ty Chandler, only 10 carries, he rushed for 82 yards. So they have some different ways they can get to you. And one of the other things that kind of surprised me is Sam Darnold with 32 rushing yards in last week's game. I saw a few times where he dodged a sack and then just scampered off for 15 yards real quick. I didn't really realize he was that fleet of foot. So he could be somebody to watch where he escapes a Will Anderson sack and just takes off and grabs you a first down and you're frustrated, just kind of like, oh man, how did we miss Sam Darnold? We let him pick up that first down. So that's what I'll be paying attention to. Hawkinson is not a factor for them. He's on the injured list, or the IR, I should say. So they don't have that big tight end weapon, the Pro Bowl tight end option right now. He's still banged up, but they can get you in a lot of different ways. He's got to be efficient, but he's shown that he can be this year.
Minnesota's offensive line is not considered among the very best in the NFL, but it does start 2 first-round draft picks and 2 second-round draft picks. So it's a very interesting team. I don't want to call it a house money game for the Texans. I mean, they're a small favorite after all. But this is a game, if they lose, no one should be going, uh-oh, the real Texans surfaced in this game, because the real Vikings might turn out to be really good. Third year under O'Connell as the head coach, second year with Flores as the defensive coordinator. But the NFL starts and to some extent ends as a quarterback league. CJ Stroud's arrival, the metamorphosis of the entire Texans franchise. When does the clock strike midnight on Sam Darnold, or does it?
Quickly, Charlie, PFF has the Vikings graded just through these two games as the fourth highest graded offensive line this year, which really kind of surprised me. They're ninth in pressures yielded before 3 seconds. 3 seconds, the quarterback should get rid of the ball. So you're right. We don't typically think of the Vikings in a great O-line, but the PFF grades are saying this season over 2 games, they've been elite.
Yeah. And Sam Darnold, you mentioned rushing, for 32 yards, 6.4 yards per scramble. Caleb Williams versus Houston week 2, five scrambles for 44 yards for an 8.8 average yard per carry. So, Houston does have the propensity to give up some of those running plays to quarterbacks, the more agile quarterbacks. So I think that is something to keep an eye on. Also, I don't think D'Amico is going to want to blitz as much as he did in week 2, especially when you have a weapon out there like Justin Jefferson who can get separation and can take it to the house. So it's going to be interesting to see what the defense looks like in week 2 versus this really good, I'll say really surprisingly good Vikings team. Any final thoughts on just overall X factors before we get into our predictions?
Well, special teams, of course, are always a wild card. Fairbairn's been spectacular plus through 2 games. The Vikings have a rookie kicker. They used a 6th rounder to take Will Reichard out of Alabama in 1 game. You never know, and Reichard will be at home, and the climate conditions will be just fine there. But just in terms of a tip of the helmet to Fairbairn, who's been knocking through 50-plus yarders when I was a kid expert prodigy at Super Toe. You guys young enough to remember that game? You pound on the helmet of the kicker and the ball would fly. I mean, Fairbairn's range looks 60-plus now.
For me, I kind of circled revenge games. I was thinking about, didn't Brian Flores sue the Houston Texans a couple of years ago? And then we also have, players going back to play their former teams with Daniil Hunter, Blake Cashman, Jonathan Grenard. So I was like, we could see some revenge game performances here where it's like, hey, you didn't want me? You want to go sign this guy? Okay, I'll show you. So that was something that kind of occurred to me.
I think for me, it's going to be penalties. Houston with 12 penalties for 115 yards surrendered in week 2. They're absolutely going to have to clean that up. But the Vikings have had 7 penalties in each of their first 2 games. So although not nearly as punitive as what we saw against Houston in week 2. So those bugaboo false starts that continue to plague Houston, they're going to have to clean those up, or at least they'd be nice to, so they can have an easier time of it. All right, time for predictions. I don't know if we mentioned or not, the spread is 2 points as we record this. There's that old adage of home teams, the home team advantage is worth 3 points. So essentially this game's a pick 'em. So let's pick 'em. Josh, let's mix it up this week. And let's start with you. Final score prediction.
Okay. I was really worried about this one, but knowing that they got to see on tape what the Niners didn't do well against the Vikings and how they can use that to their advantage this week, I'm going to have the Texans winning a close one here, 23-21.
Okay. Ooh, almost the same score, but I'm going the other way. I'm relatively bullish on the Texans, but they're not the 1972 Dolphins. They're not going undefeated. You mentioned the field goal value of home field advantage, Brandon. That suggests that if this game were in Houston, the Texans would be an 8-point favorite. I don't buy that. I mean, they beat the Bears by 6. The Vikings are better than the Bears. They played the Bears in Houston in a primetime game. Now they're going to Minnesota. So I'm going to go 23-20 in the house of the coolest in-stadium thing in the NFL. Skull, skull, skull. It's a phenomenal win if the Texans pull it off. And with Jacksonville at Buffalo, that would set up the opportunity for the Texans to be 0-4 and the Jaguars 0-4 and RIP the Texans win in Minnesota and then beat the Jaguars here next week.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? So it's one of these teams is going to be 3-0 after this week. My gut tells me to take Houston straight up, but not cover. And it's a close number. So I think the scoring comes down to Fairbairn's ability to continue to be a weapon for stall drives for Houston versus the defense, preventing those big plays. I'll say 24-23 Houston and another ugly nail biter. So we'll end it there. That's going to be it for this episode of Texans on Tap. We hope to see you back on YouTube here live Sunday, late afternoon following the game. Come on in, react with us, and hopefully celebrate a third straight win for Houston. Until then, go Texans.